the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what
We
you
are
can do for
recording
your country.
and we are on the air live, being broadcast to all 50 major media markets around the world. Hi,
Oh, that'd
Taylor.
be
How are
fun.
you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Not as good as you. I'm very excited for you and for your upcoming travels. Taylor is on her way to Japan tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm very
Really cool.
nervous and excited.
Why are you nervous about the flight? Is that it?
Yeah, I just don't like flying, but I'm gonna be fine. Kiara, our friend who is a fan of ours, she sent me some stuff about flying, which is very nice of her. Yeah, I'm just like I'm not stoked about it, but it'll be okay.
Did you choose bigger seats or better seats, or how did you do it?
No, we just have like regular seats because I mean I'm not a millionaire.
Oh, you're not?
No, not yet.
No, I gotta stop asking you to send me money then, because this whole time I assumed you were.
I am tired of sending you all my cash.
Yeah, always. Well, welcome to Doom to Fail. This is the podcast where we cover Doom to Fail topics, and we have a ton of fans and supporters around the world that we love and adore, and we're gonna probably get a few new ones as Taylor makes her way into Japan and
Oh,
shares stickers and content and guerrilla
oh
marketing
yeah.
tactics.
Honestly, I didn't even think of that. I'll bring stickers. I want to see if anybody in Japan has listened. I'm looking at a map. Yes. Ooh, I feel like it's 19 downloads from Tokyo. I feel like Lindsay, is
Okay.
that just you? Or is it like other people? Um, but
Well, there's not 19 Lindsays.
I know maybe she listened to 19 episodes.
Oh, I see. I see.
But
Yep.
someone in
Yep.
Kawasaki and 19 people in Tokyo. That's in the past 7 days. What about all time? No, that's not very many. Yeah, no, I'm very, very, very excited. I'm very nervous, but I'm very excited. I'm nervous for the planes. I just hate flying and it's 12 hours long. So like that it's gonna suck. But I'm gonna survive and um I can't wait.
One of my friends just got back from Tokyo and she
Okay.
was constantly posting pictures. Man, the food looks otherworldly good. It
Oh my
looks
God.
like there's a place here in Austin called Uchi, and they
Mhm.
have like three locations. One's Uchiko, one's Uchi, one's Uchiba. And it's like this premier pristine. It's like where you go on your anniversary, like it's one of those kinds of
Yeah.
places. She was posting pictures from like truck stops there that like looked as good. And I was like, what? Like, how is this?
I
How's
know
the
I've
thing?
heard that like there's like a tuna and rice thing at 7-Eleven that's really good. There's like a ton of 7-Elevens. That's like a big thing there. So I'm excited to like see that. And then Juan has made like 1,000 reservations for like all sorts of activities and
Gotcha.
shows and trains and events. And yeah,
Yeah, it,
it's
it
a real
has the
thing.
distinction of it is the only place where I've heard people who have gone to and they will not stop raving about it. Like a lot of people go to
Yeah.
Hawaii, a lot of people go to other parts of the world. They're like, yeah, it's great. It's awesome. We had a great time. But Japan's the only one where I'm like, when I talk to you about it, like you're not gonna understand. Like it's literally like another planet. And
I'm looking
it's
forward to being insufferable about it.
no, listen,
But you don't understand you've been to Japan.
it's you don't get it, Fars.
You don't get it. You haven't been to Japan.
All you do is just ask me for my millions. You don't understand the other side of life.
There's a
Um,
comedian on Instagram. Oh my God, what is her name? She does like people who come back from vacation, and it's so funny because she's like, "Oh, I was there for 2 days," but she like has an accent and like, whatever. So it's like hilarious.
the
So,
Madonna effect
her name's
of having
Laura.
a British accent.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Um,
Um,
well, awesome, awesome. Well, really excited about that. It's probably gonna have some impact on our recording schedule for the next week, but whatever, we'll sort it out and
well,
figure things
so
out.
here's what I've been doing the past couple days. It's Laura Ramoso, by the way, on Instagram. So I have scheduled 6 re-releases. So one for next week that will be with whatever we're doing, and then then I did one yesterday, and then 5 for the week that I'm on spring break, and then I have all the social media scheduled. I have all the YouTube videos scheduled, so like everything is ready. There will still be content.
Should we be telling people this as opposed to making them think that we're just doing this constantly, like in the moment?
No, because I literally said to re-release, so they would know.
Whatever, Taylor. Your facts have no place here.
They're
Um,
They're smarter than
Well,
that.
thank you though for doing all that work because I
Yeah.
know
Oh,
it's
thank you.
not
You're
easy and
welcome.
it's got to take a ton of time. So appreciate that.
It does take a lot.
So I guess new episode wise, we'll rejoin you in a few weeks, so.
Yeah,
Sweet,
we'll record on April. I'll be home April 13th, so we'll record April 14th.
sweet,
Okay.
easy peasy.
Yeah.
You'll be asleep April 14th, but whatever. We'll try it. We'll do what we can.
I mean,
Um,
I'm going to, who the fuck knows?
so one thing this is almost gonna sound mean, and I don't mean it mean. Okay, so. I kind of envy how short you and Juan are because
Oh no, totally.
y'all can
Dude,
actually be on planes and semi be comfortable.
I can't imagine being an inch taller than I am, and I'm like 5'3" at best. If I was 5'5", I'd be like, this is too much for me. I can't imagine being, how tall are you?
6'1".
Oh my God, that sounds terrible.
It is.
Just,
Well, it's terrible. It's good in like day-to-day life.
of
Traveling
course,
wise,
but
it is up.
I mean, on a plane, like how
Yeah.
anxious are doing things.
Yeah, it reminds me of our former CEO. So Taylor and I's former CEO was like what, like 7'1" or something. Like he was
He
huge.
was
He was
so tall. Yeah.
super tall, and he had this like Acura that he got forever ago, like a normal Acura sedan. And when you saw him driving it, he did the thing where he laid the seat all the way back.
Yeah.
Like
I
you thought he
mean,
was trying to be cool, but no, he literally couldn't fit. Like his most of his legs and waist was on the part that a normal person's back goes on.
like
That's
you
the only way he
couldn't sit
could fit.
behind him. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, he was so tall. Yeah, I can't. I mean, if I was, you know, 7 feet tall, I would have to pay for a first class seat or whatever or
Dude,
something. Like I
how
couldn't. You
can
just couldn't.
I don't get like if anybody is like that tall or like in these I would say 6'7" and above range is probably when you get into that kind of territory.
Hmm.
And you're not super wealthy, like how do you survive? I don't get it. Like you just never travel. Like I don't understand how you can get by.
I don't know. My friend Nate is like 6'5", and he flew in like the middle seat in like Delta economy. I'm like, Nate, like you're what on earth? Like he just like probably couldn't move his body at all, you know?
No, it's awful. It's awful.
No.
I just came back from my most recent trip, and I was on Southwest and sitting in the plane, and my knees were. I had indentation marks on my knees
Yeah,
from where they were in the seat in front of me because I had nowhere to put them.
I know. I know. And I feel uncomfortable and I'm much shorter than you. So
I went up to the gate agent and was like, "Hey, listen, I would really appreciate if you could. I booked kind of last minute. I would really appreciate if you put me into either an aisle seat or if you can have someone come here and break my leg so I can fit in the middle seat that you have assigned to me." And she did not find that funny at all.
oh, it's too bad. I feel like she
Too
might find
bad.
that a little charming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also speaking of Jim buying that Acura, I have to get a new car. My car is officially totaled. They're not going to fix it.
That kind of sucks, Taylor. That
Yeah,
really does suck.
it does suck. Anybody who has recommendations on a car, let me know. Because I mean, luckily it all happened yesterday, the day before I like start my vacation plan, so I can like move on from it and whatever. But man, what a butt.
What a butt of a situation. Taylor, I'm gonna go ahead and kill my video because it is freezing on your end.
Oh sure, it wasn't happening for me, but I'll do it. It's raining here, so maybe that's why.
Um, so sucks to hear. Sorry about that. Was that car paid off?
Yes,
Oh God.
I know.
You
I
know what's funny?
know.
I'll like occasionally like when I'm feeling super weak and kind of foolish when it comes to money, we'll start looking at cars and be like, oh
Hmm.
man, this is such a cool car. And then I look at my car, I'm like, my car's fine. Like I have no issues
I
with
know.
it. Like it's
I definitely
it,
was like, I would bitch about my car because, like, well, I mean, technically my husband bought it and it was his car, and then he bought a new car, and I got that one because I haven't been driving for very long. But so thank you, Juan, for letting me have the car. But now, I was like, ugh, like it doesn't have like Apple CarPlay, and like I did have, I was gonna get it like detailed and clean, so I'm glad I didn't do that because I
yeah,
was
what a
like,
waste that would have been.
yeah,
An
would have been
absolute
bummer.
waste. Well, good luck on that
Thank you.
search. The one thing I would tell you, Taylor, because I was like super on the EV train,
Hmm.
and like love Teslas, and I actually had an order in for Rivian for a period of time. And
Hmm.
as I've like kind of like gotten a little bit older with it, I was like, man, stopping every like 200 or 300 miles and having to like sit there for 30
Yeah,
to an hour, that's like that'll eat up a lot. If you're traveling, like it'll eat up quite a bit of your day.
I agree. I think it's a
So,
little weird.
I mean, I'm not saying they're not
Um,
great. They are great, but like I think they're great if you're like, I have like my regular car and then my
yeah,
car that I drive around town to go to restaurants, whatever. Like that's my EV. Like that's a probably the better
exactly.
way to do it.
Like if I had like my solar panels set up and my Tesla battery in my house and, blah blah blah, then
All the
yes.
things. Right, right.
Kind
So,
of make money
anyways,
to save money, all those things.
make money to save money. Well, let's go ahead and dive right in. You are going first today, if I recall correctly.
I am. Let me go
Sweet.
first. Um, cool. So, Faris, today is March 30th. This will come out on April 1st, but I'm still going to do one more specifically for Women's History Month. And also, speaking of Jim, remember how much Jim hated April Fool's Day?
Yes.
I hated it too. So that was dumb. So let's do one more Women's History Month story. This one actually, Kiara, our friend who sent me this stuff about flying, she also had sent me this story, and I was like, duh, this is something I absolutely should have done. So why didn't I do this earlier? So thank you for reminding me, and I'm glad that I'm doing this today.
Thank you,
Um,
Kiara.
I Yeah, thank you. So I read a book this week that I read in a book club when I lived in New York back in 2010. Um, do you know the story of the Black woman who died in 1951 whose cells have lived on and have been instrumental in creating
Yeah.
vaccines? Yeah.
Yes. Oh, man, if you gave me like 15 minutes to actually like tackle that part of my brain, I could probably remember her name.
Well, this is the story of Henrietta Lacks.
Yes.
Remember? Yeah.
Okay. It was there.
Yep,
It was in
it's
my head.
there. So there's a
What a
lot
great
here.
story. Okay, yeah. This one's. I'm super into this. Let's figure this out.
It's so
What
good.
happened?
And I'm excited to hear what, your questions and thoughts. A lot of it's like sciencey that I like barely understand. But there's a lot in this story. There's definitely a lot of race inequality, income inequality, lack of sex education and like health education, and lack of health care, historically, and sort of this will cover this whole story. One thing that I do want to mention again, and I hope I say it again in the outline. If I miss it, I want to say it up front, is so the book that I read is called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. It's really good. Definitely recommend watching it or reading it. It also was a movie. Oprah's
Yeah, I
in
was
it
gonna say it
for some
sounded like a
reason.
movie.
Yeah, it is a movie as well. But one thing that Henrietta Lacks's children say again and again is that her cells contributed so much to science, and we'll talk about what that means, but her children couldn't afford health insurance, you know?
Wild,
Fucked
wild.
up. So that's, something that is kind of hovering over this story. So the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, is written by Rebecca Skloot, who is a white woman. She's very aware that she's a white person, inserting herself into this story. Reporters had visited Henrietta's family on and off for decades, but some of them were scammers, trying to get them to like sue or get money from them, and we'll talk about why. In 1976, Michael Rogers, a reporter for Rolling Stone, wrote an article. He called Henrietta Helen Lane because people didn't know her real name. At that point, it would have been like written down many, many times. But the book is really about Rebecca gaining trust of the family, and especially Henrietta's daughter, Deborah. Oprah plays Deborah in the movie. And so it's a really like there's the story of their friendship and just kind of helping them understand what happened. And it's because it's very confusing and very complicated. So definitely recommend reading that to learn a little bit more about like the family. But let's talk about a few things. There's race in healthcare, Henrietta's life, and then what happened to her cells. So I I guess I'm going to start with like right now about in America, but I'm sure this is not just an American problem. One story that stood out to me is, do you remember when Serena Williams almost died when she had her baby?
No, not really.
So this is from an Elle article that she wrote in 2022, and underneath the headline, the first line is, quote, Black women are nearly 3 times more likely to die after childbirth than white women. Serena Williams was almost one of them. Here in her own words, she tells her story. So this article, you can read it in Elle, and I'll put the link in. So Serena Williams had some blood clots in her lungs that she knew that she had from before. So she was like having her baby, going through that. And then she started coughing, and she was coughing so badly that she like ripped her C-section scars, like absolutely horrible. And she knew that there was something wrong, and people they didn't listen to her until she finally got a doctor who listened to her and checked, and there was a blood clot on its way to her heart. She almost died.
Wow.
And this woman is like literally one of the greatest athletes of all time. Like more connected to her body than like anyone to have who's going to have a baby. And they didn't believe her that she had these things happening to her. And that happened in 2021. So still a huge thing. So if we go back in time, some of the thing that I think our true crime uh people will remember and know is like, do you remember how in like the when people were first figuring out how a human body worked, they would dig up dead bodies to dissect them?
Yes.
And like that's fun.
What?
And like
All doctors were basically grave robbers too.
yeah, in like a creepy like 1700s in London kind of way, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly. So you had to like you'd like hire people to like rob a grave or like whatever. Or how like H. Holmes is like remember he was like dating quote unquote whatever that woman and then like her skeleton ended up in like a doctor's
University.
office.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, terrifying. We still haven't known a lot about bodies for a very, very long time. But another terrible thing that happened in the mid 1900s was, of course, the Holocaust and all of the terrible things that the Nazis did to experiment on people. The Japanese also experimented on people. I'm sure that the US did as well. I could probably find, and I have examples of that too. But a lot of it is outlined in the Nuremberg codes, which were after World War II. Have you heard of that? Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Nuremberg
Of course.
Code? So it's basically 10 parts that are essentially like regulating the way that you are allowed to experiment and, work with human bodies. So I kind of cut out some of them, but essentially they are you need the voluntary consent of the human. The responsibility for the consent rests upon the person conducting the experiment. So you have to be the person that asks for consent if you're going to do it. The experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society. So it should have like a good goal. It should be based on the results of animal testing to start with. And like that is something that I've heard recently in like the doctor deaths where people are, have you ever listened to those or saw those
No.
on, it's like another podcast. It's also a Netflix show, but it is about doctors who just are like liars, who just like do these terrible things. And a lot of them have these things. They're like, oh, I'm sure this will work, but they never tested it on animals. And they lied and said that they did.
Okay.
And so like the first people
Can I
doing it was human.
just take a moral stance here? I also don't think we should be testing on animals.
No, this is the opposite stance. The stance is that you should test on animals first before humans.
And my stance is you shouldn't be testing on animals.
What are you going to test on?
I don't know. Like, I mean, now with AI, they're saying that AI can run like every test possible, like simultaneously. Like, just do that. Like, we don't need to be hurting animals.
Sure. I don't know if that's true. I'm people over animals, but whatever.
No.
Um, more of these are more of the Nuremberg Code. It should be the experiment should avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering. No experiment should be conducted where there's a reason to believe that death or disabling injury will occur, unless in the experiments where the physicians are the subjects. So you can do it to yourself, but you can't do it to other people.
Yeah, I've
Um,
heard of that. I've heard doctors who inject themselves. They found some like cures that way.
yeah, the guy who discovered that mosquitoes,
Yes.
that yeah, the mosquitoes do malaria and like the Spanish flu. He was like, "Fuck you," and had a mosquito bite him, and
Yeah.
he
Yeah. It
died, but
was.
he figured it out. Um, there is the risk should never exceed that determined by humanitarian importance to the problem solved. So the risk shouldn't be greater than the reward. Proper preparation should be made, adequate facilities. It should be conducted by scientifically qualified persons. The human subject should be at liberty to bring it to an end. And the scientist in charge must be prepared to stop at any stage. So if it starts to go too far, they have to stop. So basically, like, don't be a dick, get people's consent, don't do anything crazy. And that came out of the Nuremberg trials. Obviously, we know that that's not something that has like been 100% on for a very, very long time. Considering about the Tuskegee experiment in the United
Right.
States. So just to recap, that was from 1932 to 1972. The government gave 600 black men syphilis to test the symptoms of syphilis. even though after 1940 they had penicillin to cure syphilis, they kept doing it.
Do we know
And
why
they
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 even
didn't know.
tried, why they did that?
I think it was, I mean, they wanted to see what would happen, like, which is,
But didn't they know? I mean, we all, wasn't
I
syphilis
think
already
it's not
around?
like, it's not just that. I think it's like other things too. Like, if you have syphilis, does it make this worse or whatever? Like, there maybe a little bit more to it, but it was clearly a violation of the Nuremberg Code and bad.
Sorry, one
We can
last
talk about more
question.
about that later. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
How did lobotomies fly under the radar of the
Totally. That's a
Nuremberg
great
Code?
question, right? Because you would say like, I mean, I guess you'd say like this is for their good, the greater good, or for them, you know?
Okay, so you can basically spin anything into like, it's just
Yeah,
spin. You're just spinning something into like, yeah, okay, got it.
100%, 100%. Um, yeah, there's also like, the Hippocratic Oath, like first do no harm. And obviously doctors have done harm a lot, you know?
Right.
Not, not every doctor, but there are, some standout examples. So there's, the Tuskegee experiment happening in the United States around the time that we're going to talk about. There's also something that is like, I think a social class related thing that I've heard about in like developing countries, that I think kind of applies here too, is like a mistrust of doctors because by the time you get to the doctor, you're too far gone, so you die. Does
Right.
that make sense? So you have that. So then you're like, well, when the doctor kills people, you know,
Right.
when like
Right.
if you could have gone there earlier because if you had the insurance or you had the money or you had the means, then maybe you could have been saved. But by the time you get there, it's too late.
There's also it's that, but also like governments, the US in particular, has leveraged medicine to
Oh,
like
absolutely.
do,
Yeah.
so like for example with Osama bin Laden, you know how they did that whole thing?
What, like they killed him?
No, because they needed to identify they need to do like they need to get more circumstantial evidence that he was there on that compound. And so what they did
Hmm.
was they put together this like program to test kids for genetic diseases and for whatever. I forgot exactly what it was, but basically what they were trying to do was basically bring this whole city together and village together to like do blood testing for medical purposes, only
Hmm.
for the sole reason to isolate his DNA to better understand
Whoa.
whether he was in that city in that compound.
Cool and crazy.
And so
And
now people there are like, we are
why would
not
we trust
going.
you?
Yeah,
A
we would
thousand
not. We're not
percent.
going. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. That's crazy. Um, so Yeah, so there's that too. So people don't always go to the doc don't always go to the doctor when they can, or they have mistrust for good reason, you know. Also, I think you should go to the doctor if you haven't been in a while. Both
I
both
have
both
not.
ways. Go. So now we are in Baltimore in the late 1800s, and there is a man named Johns Hopkins. He is a strong Union supporter and seems like a pretty good guy. In 2020, there was some evidence that he may have been a slave owner, despite being a Union supporter and abolitionist. But then there's evidence against that maybe that was like paperwork for another reason. So I don't know the answer, but that's just out there. And Hopkins University and hospital is being very open with what they're learning as they're learning it. So, but what we do know for sure is that Johns, plural, that's his name, Hopkins, did leave money for a hospital and a university to specifically help poor people. He wanted to help Black people, people who couldn't afford care. Part of it was like an orphanage institution for young Black children who needed support. He wanted people to be able to have health care regardless of money or race. So that was a big part of Johns Hopkins' legacy that we still see today with his university. Um, in the 1950s, Johns Hopkins exists as a university and a hospital, but it's also segregated like everything else,
Are you
you know.
saying Johns
Yes.
Hopkins?
Yeah.
It's
Johns,
two
like
S.
the
Okay,
plural Johns. Yep.
got it.
Johns Hopkins. So I know you haven't seen this, but we've all seen Hairspray. Everyone else has seen Hairspray, and Hairspray is about segregation in Baltimore, and that's in 1962. So, um, there's a lot of race relations happening there, always, but also in the 50s. And Johns Hopkins is where you go when you are really sick. So it is the only hospital that will do these like advanced tests on Black people in the area, and your primary care doctor will refer you to Johns Hopkins, and by the time you get there, you're very sick. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Let's keep that in mind, and let's talk about Henrietta. Lacks was born Loretta Pleasant. That was her birth name on August 1st, 1920, in Roanoke, Virginia. Her family lived in former slave quarters that were owned by her white great-grandfather. So the family right now even has like a white Laxes and black Laxes side, that, they're genetically related from some point, but she had a white great-grandfather. Um, Her mom died when Henrietta was young. Her mom was having her 10th kid, like on the floor of the house, like, you know, very, very poor.
Right.
And her mom passed away. So Henrietta and her siblings moved to Clover, Virginia, and she lived there with her cousins. One of the cousins that she shared a room with was a cousin named David, but they called him Day. And he was a couple years older than her, and they end up getting married and having kids. So Henrietta marries her cousin Day. Um, and that's something that we also see over and over again. And I just happened to see like a Daily Mail article. And again, like I know that's Daily Mail is silly, but talking about people who find out via like 23andMe that they've like dated their brother because of like small towns where people have like slept around and not told anybody, or like those cases where I think we talked about this, where like the doctor like used his sperm and all of the things,
No, God, yeah.
you know, like those are horrible. Um, I also, so in that article in the Daily Mail, they had the US laws about marrying your cousin. So many states, like in California, it's legal, you can. In other states, there's some like rules around it. Like if you can't have kids, then like sure, if you're old and you want to get marry your cousin, that's fine. Things like that.
Wait,
Um,
you can't do first cousins though, can you?
yeah,
Wow. I'm
yeah.
not asking for any particular reason. I'm just
No,
curious.
no, no,
It
no.
just seems
It's a
like
good
first
question.
cousins is like kind of a you should draw the line in the sand somewhere.
And it's funny because like they frown upon it in some cases, then others they don't. Like I feel like one of like the further back historical cases, first cousins got married and people were like, ew. But then like other times it's fine. So it just depends. Obviously, like we get Habsburgs who like can barely close their mouths because of all the
Right. Right.
intermarrying. Um, Henrietta and Day's children will end up with a history of really poor hearing, high blood pressure and asthma and diabetes. So they do have a lot of health problems. Some of it could be, because their parents were cousins. Henrietta had her first child when she was 14, and she ended up having five children in total. Her child Elsie had epilepsy and cerebral palsy. Henrietta took care of her until she couldn't anymore, and Elsie was sent to a place called the Hospital for the Negro Insane, which is
That's
as terrible as it sounds. Um,
Jesus.
in the book that in The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, the author and Deborah, Henrietta's daughter, go there. It's a different institution now, and they find a record with a photo in it. And in the photo, there's like a white woman's hand, like holding Elsie's head toward the camera, and Elsie is like very clearly not okay. You know,
Um,
like her hair's a mess, her eyes are bulging out, she's like screaming. I haven't seen it, but they describe it as being absolutely horrific. Elsie will die when she's like 15 in that institution. But while she
Jeez.
was home, Henrietta, like, took really, really good care of her. And she took really good care of her family, her friends, people who remember her. She was always like kept herself really well dressed. Her house was really nice. She always had her nails painted. She was just doing her best to like live her life with
She
what
had
she had.
pride.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Henrietta and Day got married when she was 21 and he was 25, and they moved to Baltimore. After Pearl Harbor, steel became something that obviously the United States really needed, so there were a lot of steel mills in Baltimore, and they moved up there. Um, there's also some things that are happening. Day is sleeping around, and as we see this again and again, she's going to get some STDs. Like most of history, people have STDs, and as um, I'll say or said before, like this is before penicillin, and before we were able to like to cure those things. So um, just keep that in mind. Um, in She ends up having more children. She has David, Deborah, a son named Zachariah. His name was Joseph. He converted to Islam later in life, but his name is Zachariah now. And in 1950, Henrietta is 30 years old, and she tells her family that she feels a knot in her womb. That's how she describes it.
Okay.
There's something going on. There's a knot in there. And it turns out she's pregnant with Zachariah. So people are like, oh, that was it. It was a baby. Like that's what you were feeling. But after she has him, she still feels it. She's like, there's still something wrong. There's still something there. I know there's a knot in there. So her doctor refers her to Johns Hopkins, and they feel the lump on her cervix. There's definitely a lump there, like the size of a marble. So they do
Did she
a
feel? Oh, I guess, yeah, okay. Never mind.
if it's that big. I mean, and there's also I hear stories people who have like a tumor that's like the size of a golf ball and they never feel it, you know?
Yeah,
But she felt it. She knew that it was there. It was like at, like the top, like the front of her cervix, so she could feel it like with her hand, you know? So
right.
like she knew that it was there. So they took a biopsy of it, and then they found out that it was cervical cancer. There were two types of cervical cancer, and she was misdiagnosed with like the wrong one, but it doesn't really matter because they would have treated it the same at that time anyway.
Right.
So that's not it. So she starts treatment, and this is where we're talking about radium treatment again. So what they do is they literally put like a tube of radium inside her vagina, and they put sheets of lead around it to try to like save the rest of her body and just like keep it in there for a while and hope for the best,
That's so,
which is crazy.
yeah,
Um,
hopefully they advanced since then.
yeah. And so this is also something for women that I learned in this that I was like, are you freaking kidding me? So have you ever heard, I don't know, I'm laughing. Have you ever heard, you know what a pap smear is?
I know what those words are, but I don't know what it is.
So essentially they put like a plastic tube inside of your vagina and then they take like a big Q-tip and like swirl it around and then take it out and just like make sure that everything is okay in there. Um, that was invented by in the 1920s by the Greek physician Georgios Papanikolaou, whatever, it's very Greek, but it's named after him. His last name is
Oh,
Pap, which I just thought was hilarious. I just like had no idea that it was named after a dude named Pap. So but that was like part of the thing as well. But during this time, well, they take the biopsy to see what exactly is going on, and while they're giving her the radium, they give her cancer cells to a doctor named George Otto Guy. Guy is spelled Gey. He is a researcher at Johns Hopkins, and Henrietta didn't know that they were going to be given away. Not that they would have ever told her, and not that they really tell anyone. Like it's something that is complicated to a huge degree, like where does your blood go after it's drawn? They still have it somewhere, probably, you know?
I mean, it wasn't being given away. It was going off for testing.
Right. But then, something happens and it's gonna grow. But like after the testing is done, then like who owns the rights to whatever's left? So there's been a lot of like back and forth of like, and now like there was no like HIPAA at this point where like she had any privacy rights with her cells, and she wouldn't have known and she wouldn't have cared, like I don't think that it would have been a thing that would have like crossed her mind to be like, "Let's- I don't know what's going to happen to my cells." Um, there are official US guides, and I have a link to like the official government website on it now. But one part of it says, quote, when in the course of an intervention, any part of the human body is removed, it may be stored and used for a purpose other than that for which it was removed, only if it's done in conformity with appropriate information and consent. So if they like biopsy something for you and you sign a paper that says you can use these cells for something else in the future, then they can do whatever they want with it.
I mean,
You know,
until you started talking, like, uh, until you brought this up, like, exactly maybe 15 seconds ago, the question never occurred to my mind of, like, what happens to my
exactly.
cells? I've never thought
Exactly.
about it.
Yeah. Henrietta wouldn't have thought about it. I've never thought about it. Like the one thing that I remember very specifically signing away is the umbilical cord blood when my kids were born. Because there's like some research that umbilical cord blood can help other babies. So some people, if you're like rich, you'll save your blood. You'll put it in like a blood bank. So the umbilical cord will be saved just in case your baby needs it. But we donated ours. I don't know if it ended up getting thrown away or whatever, but like we signed papers that like if for some reason the umbilical cord blood when I had any of my babies could help another baby, I was like, take it. You
How
know,
would it help? What would they do with it?
I have no idea. It's
Okay.
like something I have no idea. But that's the only time I remember signing something being like, you can specifically use this for whatever you want. Because I was like, if this can help another baby, great.
Yeah, but even with that, Taylor, you probably wouldn't have even known if they didn't tell you we need you
Absolutely.
to sign this. You would have been like, wait, what about that blood in the umbilical cord?
I never would have known. I certainly wouldn't have thought about it because I was in the middle of having a baby.
Right.
You're like, I'm
Right.
busy, I don't care. Um, so the there's some stories of people who have sued after they found out that their cells were being used like commercially, and people are making a lot of money from them. But for the most part, like the laws, like or like once you give something away, it's no longer part of your body.
Right.
Um, So the radium didn't work on Henrietta's tumor in her cervix. So she went back for radiation treatments where they would like point radiation towards her. So what they did is like on her belly, like where her cervix is, they tattooed two little dots. They always did it in the same place, and they would put like lead on the rest of her body, and they would just aim radiation towards those spots, and it would like burn her skin, you know, and like left her the skin on her belly and on her um like black, burned black because of like the radiation treatment. Isn't that crazy?
Jeez. Yeah.
So really terrible. Just absolutely awful. Her family and friends were, she had a newborn baby. Her family and friends would like come visit her. She ended up ending up like she would go and do these treatments, and then she'd like walk to her cousin's house and like stay there until she couldn't do it anymore, until she was like just physically unable to do it. Her family would like try to donate blood to help her, like whatever, because she was just like so sick. They would sit with her in the hospital. She would like writhe in pain in the hospital. Her sisters would like have to hold her down. She was tied to the bed because she would go into these like fits of pain. She was in so much pain. Um, she had so many tumors in her body that ultimately her cause of death was blood poisoning because she could no longer, her kidneys couldn't work because they were covered in tumors.
Jeez,
And
so
she couldn't
awful.
pee because her urethra was covered. Yeah, like everything's covered in tumors.
Do
It's
you know
crazy.
how long from when they admitted her for this treatment until that cause of, or until she died?
Yes, she went into the hospital at the beginning, or I think the end of January 1951, and she died on August 8th, 1951.
Oh wow,
So
that was pretty quick.
yeah, like 7 months. And she was 31 years old when she died.
Yikes.
So
All right.
she was super young. Um, they, her husband, to give permission for an autopsy. And when they did the autopsy, they said it looked like there were strings of pearls in her body. There were so many tumors.
So
So
crazy.
it was just absolutely everywhere over her whole entire body. Later, we will learn that the cancer that she got came from HPV, which is something that we know about now. And now you can get a vaccine against HPV that can help fight cervical cancer. So that's like directly because of Henrietta that we're able to do that. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. So at her funeral, she was buried in an unmarked grave in Clover, Virginia. Her family said that at the service there was a gust of wind that was so bad it knocked down houses, and they were like, that was her like saying goodbye, like rattling things. Um, Meanwhile, her, children are going to kind of go around, live with family. They're going to have pretty rough lives, unfortunately. A lot of them, some of them will be in prison. They will just kind of be trying to make it work. But also something that I forgot to write down, but her son Zachariah, who um, he converted to Islam in prison, but he was so abused by his stepmom that he just like became a really violent person. And it's very, very sad. Like the poor kids, their life was sad after their mother died. Um, but meanwhile, separate from the Lacks family, Dr. Guy and his wife have a lab. They are patenting ways to keep cells. So you need to be able to test things on cells to see how cells work, how they grow, kind of figure all this stuff out. But cells don't grow out of the body. You can have a cell in like a vial or in like a dish with like something called cell culture. And this is, I'm just very lightly talking about this, but so it can like essentially feed and keep the cells alive, but eventually they will die. But Henrietta's did not die. They doubled and they doubled and they doubled. If you kept feeding them cell culture, they would grow to the size of any container that they had. And this hadn't happened before. They had never had a cells that lasted longer than like 24 hours out of the body, and they keep growing. Um, and they named the cell the HeLa cell, and that's just like the first two letters of her first name and the first two letters of her last name as like an organizing system. So they put them in a tube, wrote HeLa, HeLa on them, and then the next day came back and they were doubled, and then they were doubled, and then they were doubled, and they just kept growing. Um, so
These were cancer cells, right? That's what they
yes,
biopsied.
yes, they're cancer cells. hmm
Okay.
they did have some regular cells, but those died. But the cancer cells are the ones that are continuing to grow. Um, so I mean, like this time, it this had never happened before in science history. I have like a little bit of the reason why I don't 100% understand it. I'd love for someone to, I could read the book a third time and try to figure it out. But essentially, they were able to isolate one cell, and that cell just kept growing, dividing and dividing and dividing. They have high telomerase, which is something that helps them divide indefinitely, and they're missing a tumor suppressor gene. Um, these will also help with like mapping the human genome and figuring out who we like all of that stuff later. But they're missing something that suppresses tumors that most regular cells have, and even cancer cells have. So that for me, that tracks with how fast it spread in Henrietta, that her cancer cells weren't even regulating themselves at all. They were just growing and growing, you know?
Yeah.
So Dr. Guy started to give them away because he was like, we can do things with these. Like we can do tests on them and we can see what different things happen to human cells. So he would kind of give them to people close by, and then later he would test their limits. He would like, go to American Airlines and ask the pilot to like hold it in their pocket on their shirt and take them across the country and see if they survived, and they did. They would send them in the mail in like sealed packages to see what would happen, and they would survive train rides and flights. So he could send them everywhere. He would send them for free. He would send them to anyone who wanted them could get a vial of HeLa cells. Today, if you go to the American Type Culture Collection at atcc.com, I can't tell how many cells it is, but you can get like one packet of HeLa cells for $550, and they will be sent to you frozen. You
Can
can buy
I
them right now.
can I ask something that's going to make me sound kind of ignorant?
Yeah,
Why is this amazing?
I'm going to tell you later. I'm getting there.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So when you order them from the atcc.com, it literally says they're from a 31-year-old Black female with cervical cancer. So they're Henrietta cells. Today there are and you know how big a cell is? It's like unbelievably small. Like
Yeah. Sunny.
you know, there are so many HeLa cells that they're estimated if you put them all together, they would weigh 50 tons of
Because
just
they've
cells.
nonstop reproduced since
Yeah.
1951.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So here's what you can do and why it's important. You can test everything on these human cells. They have sent them to space. They have put them underwater. They've submitted them to radiation, every disease you can possibly think of, the heat, the cold, everything. And so because of that, they can test things on them that they can't test any other way. I don't
But
like 100% understand the science behind all of that, but because of these cells, they were able to create vaccines and create things that can help, understand cancer and understand things and say like, okay, well, how will humans, survive in space eventually and bring ourselves up there and just kind of see what happens. You can do any test possible on these cells because they are always the same and they never stop growing
why can't you do that with a normal cell?
because they die on their own.
Oh, because then you have to do it on a real human being because you
Yeah,
need their cells to stay alive to.
yeah,
Got it. Got it.
exactly, exactly. So you can have this like, what's it called when it's like the one like the first test, like you can have that and then do a bunch of tests to it and like compare it to the original,
The control and
the
yeah.
control. Yeah, exactly. And there is a little bit of stuff in like later in the book that is like, are these cells even human anymore? Are they even her anymore? You know what I mean? Like if you have this cell and you like continue to divide it forever and ever, like the cell that you have now is like from, the 500 millionth division of a cell. Like what is it anymore? So there's a lot of like, it's because it is like I don't know, a weird thing that happened. So by right away, so she dies in 1951. By 1953, Joseph Salk is using it for his polio vaccine. So he uses the HeLa cells, and that helps him create the vaccine for polio. He needs as many cells as possible to do his experiments and his tests, and for other doctors to kind of do similar things. So he needed a factory, and they built a HeLa cell producing factory at Tuskegee University. So the same place that was doing the Tuskegee um, experiments, they had a lab run by the Black people who went to the university, mailing it out all over the world, which is
Well,
pretty incredible. By like 2 years later, um, they were. Some things that also happened, like one guy injected the cells directly into people with and without cancer to see what would happen. And he did that on prisoners who volunteered for it. So
What did they learn?
I think that like if you didn't have cancer, the cancer cells would they would die inside of you, but if you did, they would grow. So it was like a thing to try to figure out like what would happen. Um, they used it for gene mapping,
Wait, if you
research
were
into
to inject yourself with her cell, would it would just die? So it could only really be immortal if it was outside your body?
yes, or if it's like another cancer cell. Yeah. Because your body's gonna fight cancer cells,
Got it. Got it. Yep.
right?
Yep. Okay.
I'm probably totally wrong. All the doctors who listen are gonna be like, what the hell? Um, but they did like some things in the 70s that were like sensational. They like merged them with animal cells to see what would happen. And like so that of course like the tabloids would be like, there's gonna be a half human, half mouse, and that wasn't what they were doing. They were doing other things that I don't understand, but there's that. Um, they've basically been um experimented with in a thousand different ways. They're so strong, they fly through the air and contaminate other experiments. So you have to like really be careful with their HeLa cells because they can go into another experiment and change the results to that one. So ever since she died, even before she died, Guy was using her cells and they've just been, everywhere. In the meantime, her family has no idea this is happening. So they start getting calls in the 70s to get like their blood drawn. And Deborah, her daughter, thinks that it's a cancer test. She doesn't know. And she's about the same age that her mom was when her mom passed away. So she's like thinking that she's going to also get this. She's like in her early 30s. But they don't tell them anything. The doctors just kind of take their blood and don't tell them anything. They they hear rumors like there are clones of Henrietta walking around. Um, they, like, do the cells feel anything? Does she know what's happening? Is she in pain? Like, that she's going everywhere. Like, how much of her exists? Like, so much of it is so hard to understand. That they just like, and no one helped them. No one told them anything. They were just like doing this and sometimes asking for their DNA and their blood. Um, they also had her name wrong in uh, like the news, they called her Helen Lane, but it's not. It's Henrietta Lacks. And so a lot of the book is about, letting the family know what is happening, showing them the cells, teaching them about the science. Deborah passed away during the writing of the book, but she had, tried to learn. She tried to go to school for science and figure out what was happening to her mom because it's something that is hard to wrap your brain around now, always, and she was like, I never met my mother really. She died when she was a little girl. And so she wanted to like figure out what was happening. The Lax family medical records were published without their consent. One dude wrote a book about the HeLa cells and never mentioned the family or Henrietta even once. Like that just like wasn't a part of something that had crossed their minds. Um, in
Well, yeah, but it sounds like that's like kind of what's supposed to actually happen. I was looking up while you were talking the immortal cells, and
Mhm.
they found many, many others after that, and none of them identify where they come from. Like one I'm reading right now says that it came from peripheral blood of a 14-year-old with leukemia. Another one came from a 58-year-old Caucasian male with some sort of tumor in his lung.
Right. So
So,
in this case, like, in 2013, Henrietta's DNA sequence was published, and that's like it's very specifically the DNA sequence of her family, and we
right,
know who she is
right.
and we know who they are. So, and like I said in the beginning, all of this stuff that like we are really lucky to have, like the polio vaccine, and all this research that we can do with these cells, and her children can't afford health insurance, you know, like
Yeah.
all the stuff that has been created because of this. And then so that I think that was like one of the big ones. Like they knew who she was and they talked about her in the press and they would bother her family and they would try to like, but they wouldn't explain to them what was happening. Um, and then in 2013, her DNA sequence was published. Research kept coming out like on that DNA sequence, and her family sued Thermo Fisher in 2021, and they settled out of court on July 30th, 2023 for an undisclosed amount. So hopefully they got something,
Yeah, of
from,
course.
and I don't think it's even about the cells at this point. It's about like their whole life they've been like hounded by the press. They've been hounded by people wanting their DNA and their cells to try to like figure out all these things. They're using them. They're not like harming them with the experiments, but they are
They're
ruin their
using
lives.
them.
Yeah,
They're
they're
using them.
using
Like, I
them.
mean, that's the part. Like, when you
Yeah.
were talking about this, I was like, you shed skin cells all the time. Do you really give a shit? Like, does anybody
No, yeah, of
ever
course.
care that you wash your hair and like a piece of hair comes out? And it's like, no, it's just it is what like the cells themselves don't seem like the reason for the compensation so much as, you know, the actual labor of the family to
Hmm.
help facilitate completing the picture of what's going on. That's the part
Yeah.
where I'm like, yeah, of course you should do something for that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, since Henrietta's death, she's been put in the National Women's Hall of Fame. There's countless labs and statues and plaques and things named after her. And her cells will most likely live forever in some sort of, you know, frozen, unfrozen state where they grow or not grow or in space or in the bottom of the ocean. Like they're kind of everywhere, which is what makes them special is that they continue to grow. We continue to use them. But um, we should also talk about the person they came from. Make sense?
There's like nine or so I can tell that they have found.
Hmm.
Um, but only it looks like four or five are human. One's like
Yeah,
a
interesting.
mouse, one's like a
Hmm.
possum, one's a monkey. Um, yeah, weird. Like this is why I'm not a scientist. Like
Exactly. I'm still like, why? But also like,
I don't
whoa.
get I get it. Like, okay,
Yeah.
it's like when you try and explain why how airplanes fly, and it's like somebody has this figured out. Like, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah. It's not
know
my job.
how much more I need to sort
I don't need
through.
to look into this anymore. Exactly. I'm the person who's in charge of this. But we know that this like is happening and it's a wild story and crazy that I mean, imagine like the day in the lab being like, oh my gosh, these are not dying. Like they're continuing to grow. Like what can we do with this? Oh, and also Dr. Guy, when he died, he had cancer and he wanted to be experimented on. And he asked his coworkers to like pull out his tumor and like biopsy it and see if it was immortal, see if that would help. But they didn't, they opened him up and they didn't want to do it because they thought that it would they didn't want to risk it. So they sewed him back up and he was pissed when he woke up and found out that they hadn't done the thing that he asked them to do. And he ended up going around to different hospitals and being like, do every experiment possible on me while I'm still alive. Like
Well,
yeah,
good
do you
for
have something
him.
that you've wanted to test on a human? I'm here. And he got a bunch of things done to him before he passed away of cancer as well, which is brave and nice.
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
he did what he would have done to somebody else probably.
Yeah, totally. And he
At
he
least
did it,
he's
which
not
is
a
part of the
hypocrite.
Nuremberg Code is like if you're a doctor and you say it's okay, then
Go
go
for
ahead.
it. Go nuts.
Yeah, go ahead
Interesting.
and do that.
I learned a
Yeah.
lot. This was really educational. Like, I love when our episodes like segue into like just like generally interesting things around
Hmm.
like the science aspect of it, and you like researched it well enough to where I'm like asking questions and you get it and are able to kind of articulate it. Like, I don't again, like all this stuff, like I have no idea. Like,
Yeah, totally. Like we're clearly not scientists, but this is a story that we should know in some way, shape, or form.
I don't think
And
it's
if we
that
want,
clear that we're not scientists. I think you're
you don't think
underselling us. I
so?
think some people think that if they were to listen to us talking, they'd be like, these guys are probably scientists.
You know what I wish? I wish you would that we could turn on our cameras right now and I was wearing like a lab coat and like goggles. Like I was talking about my favorite part in Airplane is when the one lady's like, I think the man next to me is a doctor, and Leslie Nielsen is sleeping with the stethoscope on.
You turn on and like I'm wearing like a monocle and a top hat. You're like, that's not what a scientist looks like for our
That's what I
science.
was saying. I have goggles on, and I'm like, you're like, Taylor, those are the wrong kind of goggles. I have like a
Yes.
scuba goggles on.
Man, fun times.
Yeah,
That was awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Taylor. What an
yeah, thank
awesome
you.
like episode to do right before we do a little hiatus.
Yeah,
So
okay,
cool.
cool.
Lots learned. But yeah, I guess is there anything that you want to make announcement wise?
No, if you we have a whole bunch of new Instagram followers because I did a reel and I paid for it. be out there on Agatha Christie. So if you have listened recently and our Agatha Christie episode had a lot of downloads. So we really appreciate everybody who might be new. Thank you for listening. And if you have any ideas, send us an email, doomtofailpod@gmail.com. And we're at Doom to Fail on all socials. And also if you know what kind of car I should get, let me know.
Yes,
Thanks.
write in with your suggestions on we have to put some guardrails around this, Taylor. Okay, it
Great.
has to be a car you own or have owned,
Okay.
and you need to have owned it for 3 years minimum.
My first thought was like, should I get a Cybertruck? Like, obviously I'm not, but like I was like, let's get weird with it. Could you imagine?
I see those things everywhere
Do
now in
you?
Austin,
I've never seen
everywhere.
one. Oh my God.
They are, no matter how many times I've seen it, every time I see them, like it looks like a refrigerator driving down the street. Like it looks so strange.
It's so funny. I have to come visit to see one because I definitely will never see one here. I do see a fair amount of Teslas, but I've not seen a Cybertruck, and that'd be hilarious.
Yeah,
I'm not doing
yeah.
that. I'm thinking Subaru, so give me a call.
Oh, I
Or
love
put a
Subarus.
Subaru.
Subarus are great. Subarus, like I can really get behind this because
That's what Blair was
what
saying too, because Blair says she also sees Subarus all over Austin and she really wants one.
yeah, so so here's one thing, especially for
Mhm.
you, all-wheel drive. Get a car that has all-wheel
Yeah.
drive, but mostly cars that have all-wheel drive are also super expensive. Subaru's like the only company that's figured out how to do it like consistently on the cheap or cheap-ish. And
Hmm.
so all their cars have all-wheel drive, which is great. Like I had an all-wheel drive car when the freeze hit Austin. I was so thankful. While everybody else like
Yeah.
just spinning in the middle of the streets, like I was actually able to move and go places. So
Yes, that'd be cool. Maybe I would kind of want maybe a green one. I don't know. I feel like I'm like, could I get a green car? Can I do whatever I want right now? And you're like, yeah, you can do whatever you want right now. So
are we adults?
I've never bought a car before. Like I didn't get my license until 6 years ago. And like I said, my husband bought our car, then he bought himself a new car. So I've just been like driving Juan's cars very gratefully. But now I'm like, what if I got a car just for me? What could that even be like? And then I'm like, I was like looking at green cars. I was like, found these cool cars, but they were like not real. They're like models of cars. So I'm like, okay, I just need to calm down and get like a normal car.
If you, dear listener,
I can't do
drive a
whatever I
green
want.
Subaru, please
Yeah,
write
give me
to
a
us
call.
and tell us if the color has impacted your life positively or negatively.
Oh, good question. Good call.
There we go.
Thanks.
Um, Sweet. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, Taylor. I'm gonna go ahead and
Thanks,
cut
Lars.
this out. And